Pomej. The Lunatic of Space Station Delta 7.5. Sherlock Holmes, The Galactic Cases, Episode 2. Based on the characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production. On the bridge of the Ultimo 1, a heated discussion was unfolding between Captain Decker and First Officer Tornot. "Sir, we ought to get rid of Sherlock Holmes and his doctor friend as quickly as possible. You don't particularly care for him, do you?" The captain leaned back in his command chair and rested his head on his right hand. "Oh, have you noticed that too?" came Tornot's counter-question, with more than a hint of irony in his voice. "Let me guess. You think the two Englishmen are snobs," Decker said, snapping his fingers. "I consider Sherlock Holmes to be particularly dangerous to our ship's safety. He's been smoking in the shower cubicle again. This time, however, only after he managed to deactivate the sprinkler system. What if a fire breaks out on board? And what do you have against Dr. Watson? He's also a heavy smoker and probably even gave Holmes a leg up to reach the sprinkler. What's more, he's already complained after finding out that his cabin is smaller than Holmes's guest suite. If I may say so, sir, the pair of them are nothing but dead weight. At some point, they must run out of the tobacco that Holmes carries in his jacket pocket." "Hardly, sir, as those two know-it-alls have worked out how our matter duplicator functions and have already stockpiled supplies." Decker's eyebrows shot up to his blonde hairline. "Oh, I wouldn't have thought them capable of that." "Yes, sir. Likewise, Holmes has already duplicated your predecessor's bottle of cognac from the wall cabinet. He enjoys having a glass with the doctor, who now also wears a green brocade tie, since Holmes duplicated his own for him, so Watson wouldn't always have to wear the bow tie with his shirt collar," Tornot said irritably. "Right then, let's set course for the past and drop off these demanding gentlemen where they belong." Tornot rubbed his hands together with delight. At last. Then they suddenly heard a loud clonk. "What was that, Tornot?" "I haven't the foggiest idea. We ought to consult the ship's computer, sir." At that very moment, as if on cue, the aforementioned ship's computer chimed in and announced in a matter-of-fact voice, "Attention, Captain Decker. A rescue shuttle has just docked at the cargo bay. The occupant is one Mahari Rishi, ID number 1297775KL. "Does the name match the ID number?" Decker inquired. "Yes, indeed, Captain Decker. Already verified. The young lady is unarmed." "Right then, I'll grant her entry," ordered Decker as he rose. "Access to the cargo bay is granted," repeated the ship's computer. "Come along, Tornot. We must find out what brought her to us." Decker was already hurrying to the lift. "Must be an emergency," Tornot reckoned, following close behind him. When the lift door opened, Holmes and Dr. Watson were standing inside. "Mr. Decker and Mr. Tornot, how delightful to meet you," Holmes flattered them with his British politeness. And Dr. Watson immediately chimed in. "We're delighted to see you." "I've already heard how much you're enjoying your stay with us," said Decker. "Yes, we're on our way to multiply the peppermint sweets that Watson found in his trouser pocket using your remarkable magic machine," explained Holmes. "Tesk," said Tornot, squinting at Decker. "That will have to wait." Decker dismissed his guest's request as he entered the lift with Tornot. "A young lady is waiting for us in the cargo room." "Oh, we should get some flowers for the young lady from the magic apparatus first," Dr. Watson suggested. "The lady couldn't care less about your flowers," Tornot snapped at him. "Tornot, don't!" Decker scolded him. "Our dear Mr. Tornot seems to have got out of bed on the wrong side today," Holmes assessed, slightly piqued. Silently, they drove down to the cargo bay on the lower deck, where the small rescue shuttle stood like an oversized beetle on 6 legs. The occupant had already disembarked and was waiting for the captain, still wearing her helmet. "Welcome aboard, Miss Rishi." Decker greeted her and introduced himself and his companions. "My name is Captain Decker, my first officer Tornot, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson." Mahari Rishi was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, very slim, and wore a navy blue spacesuit that clung tightly to her feminine features. When she removed her helmet, a pretty, very symmetrical face with light blue eyes was revealed. Her platinum blonde hair was trimmed into a very short crew cut. "Good Lord!" exclaimed Dr. Watson, clapping his hands together in horror. "You poor thing! Who on earth has shaved your hair as brutally as if you were a galley slave?" Perplexed, she replied, "My hairdresser." "You should sue that botcher," Dr. Watson said heatedly. "I know a very good lawyer, Sir Henry Robertson, a friend of mine. Can we fetch him with the absorber beam as well, Mr. Decker?" "No, we have enough lawyers on board. Besides, the young lady's hairstyle isn't an accident. It's the height of fashion." The doctor's face turned reddish with embarrassment. Tourneau was quietly chuckling with glee. "Captain Decker," Miss Rishi saluted smartly, "I urgently need your help." "Has a murder been committed?" Holmes inquired with barely concealed delight at the prospect of an intellectual challenge. "In that case, I shall naturally be at your disposal to help solve it." "Tick!" Tourneau made a disapproving sound and shook his head. "No murder has occurred," replied Miss Rishi. "It's a different unpleasant matter, specifically on our space station in the third quadrant of Ross 154. "Is that far from England?" Dr. Watson wanted to know. "Barely 10 light years," Miss Rishi knew. "Tell me briefly what the problem is, Miss Rishi," Decker prompted her. "It's about some unusual occurrences on Space Station Delta 7.5, she said. Holmes asked in bewilderment. "Why 7.5? "Tss," escaped Tourneau again. Miss Rishi shrugged her shoulders. "Because our space station is half the size of a normal one. It houses a sanatorium exclusively for female astronauts who have been severely traumatized." "Ah," said Dr. Watson. "Could this possibly be a lunatic asylum?" "That's not politically correct," Miss Rishi objected indignantly. "Though it's roughly the truth. We call it a sanatorium for female astronauts with special psychological needs. If I understand correctly, you're simply giving an old-fashioned institution a new, more pleasant-sounding name, young lady?" Holmes made certain, and upon Rishi's nod, continued. "How peculiar." "To be perfectly honest," Miss Rishi remarked rather snippily, "I find your peculiar suits far more bizarre." "Hey! Tourneau chuckled to himself. "These are quite fashionable, young lady," Dr. Watson defended himself, briefly tapping his chest. "Particularly our green ties made of expensive brocade." "Enough of this banter now," Decker restored order. "What do you mean by unusual occurrences, Miss Rishi?" "Well, it keeps happening that the air conditioning causes extreme temperatures. At one point we had 40 degrees Celsius and were sweating. Then, half an hour later, it was 15 degrees Celsius and we were freezing. Then, suddenly, all the robots went mad and started cooking our soup with washing up liquid, which led to soap bubbles when we spoke. Then they washed our laundry with glue. Then they dismantled each other. Then loud music played in the middle of bedtime, waking us up, and so on. Behind all these peculiar shenanigans must be someone who's lost their mind but doesn't let it show." "Well, someone losing their mind in a mental hospital is not unusual per se," remarked Dr. Watson. "Sanatorium for female space travellers with special mental health requirements." Holmes corrected him sharply and turned to Decker. "I am prepared to solve this case for you and the young lady as well." "Well, aren't we blessed with good fortune once again?" Tourneau sneered, rolling his eyes. "Tournot, to the bridge with you. Set course for Space Station Delta 7.5 in the third quadrant of Ross 154. Come along, Miss Rishi. I'll show you to one of our guest cabins." Together, they all took the lift upwards. Tournot got off at the bridge, whilst the others continued up to the deck with the guest cabins. "I'm delighted to be able to take a bath now," Miss Rishi exclaimed. "Thank you for your hospitality, Captain Decker. I'll report back to you after I've freshened up." "Yes, please do, Miss Rishi. The journey will take several hours. You've covered quite a considerable distance in your small shuttle." "I used the turbo and a quantum tunnel," she admitted, "although such tunnels are rather dangerous for small spacecraft." "Yes," Dr. Watson agreed. "One never knows whether a train might be coming from the opposite direction on the same track." Decker closed his eyes, not even bothering to educate the doctor about quantum mechanics. Together with him and Holmes, he returned to the bridge. Have you already wired our new course to your fleet command, Mr. Tornot? Holmes wanted to know. We don't use cables anymore, Tornot explained to him. Given the distances we typically cover, that would require far too much material. Tornot, he means whether we've informed our command, he just used the vocabulary he's familiar with, Decker corrected him, and then said to Holmes, No, we don't need to account to command for emergency operations, only to our accounting department, which then calculates the costs and, depending on the case, either recovers them or simply writes them off as a loss. How extraordinarily interesting, remarked Holmes. Dr. Watson spoke up. Perhaps we should devise some entertainment program for our charming guest, even if his hairstyle looks rather dreadful. Yes, how about playing doctors and nurses? Tornot suggested, catching a stern look from his superior. With all due respect, I meant. I think Miss Rishi will let the hours pass by preserving her beauty, said Decker, as he took his seat in the command chair. Then I would be happy to tell you about one of my solved cases if you'd like, Holmes suggested. No, Tornot blurted out. I suggest you both get some shut-eye to recharge your batteries for the difficult task ahead. Agreed, Holmes concurred and departed with Dr. Watson. No sooner had they left than Tornot criticised. Those two relics of a bygone era fit in here about as well as a flock of penguins in the Gobi Desert. But they've already proven themselves so far, Decker reminded him. Yes, sir. However, they haven't had much to do with modern women until now. I can see cultural difficulties looming on the horizon. The hours flew by, and Space Station Delta 7.5 came into view. At last, Tornot said with delight. I'm very curious about the female inhabitants of the station. Don't get too excited, warned Decker. After all, we're dealing with inmates of a, let's not put too fine a point on it, lunatic asylum. Oh, it surely won't be that dreadful, sir. Mahari Rishi was summoned over the ship's intercom to report to the captain, which she hastily did. Oh, it was wonderful to be able to bathe in the shower unit, she gushed. I noticed that your water is of superb quality. Unfortunately, someone unknown tampered with our water on the space station by adding dye to it. It seems clear that it must have been one of the female patients, Tornot concluded. We wouldn't have needed a detective for that, sir. I'm certain that with his keen sense of detection, he'll quickly discover who the culprit is. Decker firmly believed in his guest from the past abilities. Captain, may I ask you something in private? Miss Rishi inquired with a shy flutter of her eyelashes. Of course. What would you like to know from me? Decker smiled at her kindly. Do you find me unattractive with my hairstyle? Oh no, not at all. Don't take Dr. Watson's reaction to heart. He's from the 19th century, when ladies would pile their long hair into tall updos and only let it down at night to seduce the gentleman. Phew, that's a relief, she whispered more to herself. Holmes and Dr. Watson joined them on the bridge, looking fresh and lively. Space Station Delta 7.5 appeared harmless, shaped like a horizontal honeycomb with a round glass dome above it, and an airlock on each of its 6 sides for direct spacecraft docking. Well, well, mused Holmes, whilst looking through the front window of the Ultimo 1. How can such a large structure simply remain stationary in space without any visible anchor? Because no energy is being expended on its movement, explained Miss Rishi. This corresponds to the tendency of physical bodies to remain in their state of motion unless external forces or torques act upon them. Tornot couldn't resist making a biting remark after glancing at his wrist computer. You really ought to know about the principle of inertia, Mr. Holmes. It comes from Sir Isaac Newton, a fellow Englishman who lived from 1643 to 1727 before your time. Did you not learn anything about him at school? Tornot, stop it! Decker waved off irritably. We're not here to be lectured about physics, but to investigate some unusual incidents on the space station. Thank you, Mr. Decker, Holmes acknowledged. I couldn't have put it better myself. You think you're very clever, Mr. Holmes, do you? Tornot hissed at him. And you only seem clever after glancing at that trinket on your left wrist. Could it perhaps be a portable encyclopedia? Holmes surmised. Caught red-handed, Tornot admitted. It seems nothing escapes your notice. I am a man of great mental prowess and brilliant deductive abilities. Do not forget that, Holmes mentioned, not without pride. On our ward, women are in charge. Do you have a problem with that? Asked Miss Rishi, sizing Holmes up from head to toe. You're asking an Englishman that? We were ruled by Queen Elizabeth I and our universally beloved Queen Victoria, so we certainly have experience with the guiding hand of a formidable woman, Holmes remarked nonchalantly. Indeed, Dr. Watson agreed with him. Medically speaking, a woman is simply a human being too. Miss Rishi's eyes now grew wide and doe-like. After docking, Decker, Tornot, Holmes and Dr. Watson, led by Miss Rishi, passed through the airlock, which didn't require a spacesuit, into the interior of the space station. The light from above occasionally flickered like a broken fluorescent tube. What's with these light effects? Holmes asked with a grim look at the ceiling. Are they part of some welcome ritual around here? No, Miss Rishi shook her head. That troublemaker with severe trauma has been at it again. Oh, look there, Holmes, Dr. Watson said with delight. There's one of those magical devices, just like the one on the ship. Yes, confirmed Tornot. They've got a material duplicator here as well. Splendid, now I can finally duplicate my peppermint sweets, announced Dr. Watson, taking some of the sweets from his trouser pocket and placing them inside. Is that really necessary right now? Criticised Decker. Yes, we want to have fresh breath when we greet all the ladies here, said Holmes, and opened the flap of the device but recoiled. But the sweets have turned completely black. They look like... He removed the sweets and smelled them. Coal. I could have guessed as much, said Miss Rishi. She's already ruined the duplicator as well. Meanwhile, the light had stabilised again and provided uninterrupted visibility without nervous flickering. A petite woman in a pink jumpsuit strode energetically towards the newcomers. Her blood-red hair was 50 centimetres long and stood straight up, giving the impression of a taller figure. May I introduce our director, Dr. Simmer Volheim, said Miss Rishi in an unctuous voice. Welcome. I've already heard about you, Captain Decker. The director nodded to him. The gold uniform suits you excellently. Your ship's computer has already announced your crew to me. The tall man must be Detective Mr. Holmes. Enchanted, my lady, he bowed gallantly. Might I ask you to acquaint me with all the procedures here straight away? Well, she began, gesturing for them all to follow her as she continued speaking whilst walking. The station is divided into 6 sectors. Sector 1 is our medical bay, Sector 2, our private quarters, Sector 3, the nature simulation where we can grow our food organically, Sector 4 is a common room, Sector 5, the laboratory, and Sector 6 is the secure ward, where 5 severe cases are currently confined with no possibility of escape. How many ladies are there here who are allowed to move about freely? Inquired Dr. Watson. Apart from myself and Mahari Rishi, there are currently only 15 traumatised spacewomen here, of whom 10 find their treatment agreeable and 5 occasionally rebel against it. What does the treatment involve? Dr. Watson wanted to know. In the morning, they receive medication with breakfast. At lunch, they are fitted with an electrode cap for brain stimulation, and in the evening, they get an injection for dreamless sleep, explained Dr. Simmer Volheim. And what does such a rebellion against it look like? Asked Holmes. Usually they spit out their medication with great force, tear off their electrical cap, and absolutely refuse their injection in the evening. Dr. Simmer Volheim stopped in front of a gate. This is Sector 1. The infirmary, Dr. Watson recalled. As a former army doctor, that interests me the most. Speaking of military matters, do you keep weapons at the ready, Dr. Simmer Volheim? No, of course not. This space station is a peaceful facility, however. Unfortunately, one can fashion weapons from everyday objects or repurpose otherwise useful items for such purposes, admitted the director. Has that happened before? Holmes probed. Unfortunately, a kitchen knife was turned into a throwing knife that was hurled at me from a distance, though it missed its mark. Well, Fortunately, you're so small, so that lunatic didn't have much of a target to aim at, Torno laughed. Tornot don't, warned Decker. Dr. Simmervolheim ignored the joke and continued. And, to preempt your next question, Mr. Holmes, no. Unfortunately, I was unable to identify which of the patients wanted to strike me in such a way. Her face still reflected some of the agitation she must have felt at that moment. I was right behind her at the time, Miss Rishi interjected. Immediately ran in the direction the knife had come from, but couldn't find anyone. She presumably escaped through one of the air shafts. Ah, that would be a way to move between all sectors undetected, Decker interjected. Not wanting to be rude, Tornot chimed in. When will there be something to eat? We can certainly make a detour to the dining hall in Sector 4, agreed the director, gesturing again for everyone to follow her. On their way there, they encountered a tall, sturdy woman in a flowing white robe in the spacious corridor that connected all sectors. Is this the ancestress who's known to haunt these halls? Inquired Dr. Watson. No, that's Lieutenant Mary McQueen, who unfortunately had a close encounter of the third kind. The director introduced her and turned to the person in question. Hello, Miss McQueen. How are you today? I can still see those neon yellow jellyfish-like creatures before me, trying to burn me with their stingers, she reported and burst into tears. Sob! Very good, Tornot commended. Cry, Miss McQueen, then you won't need to visit the loo quite so often. Sherlock Holmes bowed before her and said, Miss McQueen, have you noticed anything unusual on this space station? Yes, I heard strange noises. They sounded as if someone was knocking on the airlock doors. But you haven't seen who's knocking, have you? No, whenever I got closer, the noises stopped. I'm frightened on my own. Could someone accompany me? Miss Rishi volunteered. I'll gladly accompany you. As they walked on, the headmistress quietly remarked to Holmes, These are just typical manifestations of her psychological disorder. I'm sure the sounds were only playing in her mind. I certainly didn't hear anyone knocking at the locks. A woman with a straw hat just came out of Sector 3. Her stout body was shrouded in a loose grass-green cloak, and she carried carrots and lettuce in a basket on her arm. That's Miss Kendra Blossom, our gardener. The director pointed at the Rubensesque figure. She was stuck in a rocket tube for a week, which caused her claustrophobia. I'm feeling much better now. I only get my attacks in confined spaces, added Miss Blossom. That's lovely produce you have there. Holmes delighted in the natural sight. Have you ever been disturbed during your work in Sector 3, Miss Blossom? After brief consideration, she revealed, Yes. Once a robotic lawnmower came charging at me like a wild beast, and I could only save myself by jumping into the cornfield. Either it had a malfunction, or it was that saboteur woman at work, Dr. Simmervolheim finished her sentence. Here, take the carrots, sir. Miss Blossom offered the basket to Holmes. Thank you very much. We shall enjoy these thoroughly. Looking forward to the treat, he took the orange vegetables and continued on with the others to Sector 4. The common room was furnished with numerous colourful seating arrangements and a long glass table, around which 20 rainbow-coloured plastic chairs were grouped. Dr. Simmervolheim pointed to a device on the wall behind. That's the microwave oven. You can put the carrots in there for a few seconds, Mr. Holmes, to give them a pleasant bite consistency. While Holmes was cooking his vegetables, the others settled into their chairs. A small robot on wheels came rolling up with a tray. Its square head had large, round eyes that blinked incessantly. On the tray were a bottle and 5 cups, which it placed in front of the guests. Meanwhile, the carrots were done, and Holmes brought them to the table, where he placed them on an empty plate that had been set out. They smell rather peculiar, he remarked, sniffing sceptically at one. Is it Tuesday today? Asked Dr. Watson. I have a dinner invitation from Lady Ecclesfork, you see. As far as I know, she always serves rather dry meat, Holmes interjected. We're better off here. Yes, I can see that, said Dr. Watson, watching the robot which, in its attempts to pour from the bottle into the cups, consistently missed its target. causing the liquid to spread across the glass table while the cups remained empty. "Oh dear, you'd better not try the carrots," warned the headmistress. Unfortunately too late, as Tornot had already greedily taken a bite, spat out the piece in disgust and exclaimed, "Yuck, these vegetables are made of plastic." "Ah, so we've caught our saboteur," Decker said with satisfaction. "It's the gardener." "I doubt that." Holmes raised concerns. A saboteur wouldn't directly hand over the sabotaged vegetables. Besides, with her build, she'd hardly fit through an air duct, and she's terrified of confined spaces, which is another reason to rule her out. By the way, what is plastic? A mishmash of macromolecules, or rather polymers, that can be used to imitate all sorts of things, explained Tornot, who repeatedly scraped his tongue against his front teeth, which looked rather peculiar. It was produced in such quantities from the 20th century onwards that it even ended up in the stomachs of marine fish. "And now in our vegetables," Dr. Watson noted sadly. "I'd much prefer Lady Ecclesfork's dry meat to this." "We could also eat energy bars," suggested the director, retrieving several silver foil-wrapped snacks from a shelf on the wall next to the cooker and distributing them to her guests. Everyone rustled their bars out of the foil and munched away in silence. This tastes of ginger," Dr. Watson noticed. "That reminds me of a patient who always liked to rebel," the director recalled. Inga Kalsdorf, an astronaut who became stranded on an uninhabited planet and couldn't cope with the solitude. She started talking to the stones and claimed that they responded to her. "And where might Miss Inga Kalsdorf be at present?" Holmes wanted to know. "She mainly occupies herself with our house pet, the exotic one. When you whistle for it, it comes running, and she usually follows it," explained the director and let out a loud whistle. After 2 seconds, a creature about 50 centimetres tall came bouncing along. It moved on its tail, which was coiled like a spiral spring. It had no hind legs, just the springy tail, and 2 small arms like a kangaroo's on its light brown furry upper body. Its little head resembled that of an endearing squirrel, and it was making squeaking noises. "We imported Fifi from planet Filterlantes along with his special food. He has a positive effect on the patients," explained Dr. Simmer-Volheim. "Could Fifi perhaps be responsible for all this trouble?" asked Decker. "No," replied the director. "Fifi has the mental capacity of a 3-year-old child and could neither make plastic grow in carrots, nor dismantle robots into their individual parts, nor— I can't even remember all the other catastrophes that have occurred here lately." At that moment, a stunning ginger-haired woman appeared wearing a purple jumpsuit. "Am I interrupting, Dr. Simmer-Volheim?" "Not at all, Miss Kalsdorf. You're not disturbing us. May I introduce our guests, Captain Decker?" He immediately jumped up from his chair and greeted the beauty. "Hello! What a sight for sore eyes!" The director continued impassively. "Mr. Tornot, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson." "Oh, a new doctor? Would you like to examine me right away, Dr. Watson?" She hurried over to him, leaving Decker standing there, who sat back down disappointedly. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do, Lady Kalsdorf." He immediately rose and made a bow. "Oh, you smell wonderfully of lavender." "Yes, I grow lavender in Sector 3. One can drink it as tea as well," she trilled. Holmes interjected. "While this may all be very interesting, we are here to determine who has been acting as a saboteur on this space station." "Well, I'm certainly not the one," Lady Kalsdorf chirped and turned away offended. "Come along, my dear," Dr. Watson calmed her. "Let's go somewhere where I can examine you in private." Both disappeared, followed by Fifi, who hopped after them with excited squeaks. A very thin woman in a long red robe entered Sector 4. Her dirty blonde hair was backcombed into a towering beehive that swayed with each of her steps as if shaken by an earthquake. "Oh dear," groaned the headmistress. "Yet another rebel and troublemaker. That's Miss Gentry Peacham, a proper drama queen. Always has something to complain about and makes a mountain out of every molehill." "Doctor," Miss Peacham exclaimed as she approached. It's absolutely outrageous what one has to put up with around here. What is it this time? Inquired the director with an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes upward. Have you found another speck of dust on the shelving, or has one of the robots been harassing you? Much worse. Just imagine. Who are these men? She stopped abruptly and examined Holmes, Decker and Tornot more closely. I've never seen them here before. That's because we only just docked here, Tornot admitted to her. But if this carries on, we'll soon be undocking again. In any case, it's a scandal, Miss Peacham continued. I wanted to take a shower, but someone disabled the artificial gravity in my bathroom. Not a single drop of water could touch my luxurious body. Ah, that explains the pungent smell, Tornot let slip. Tornot, don't, Decker scolded him once again. And how did you solve the problem? Asked Dr. Simmervolheim. Quite simple. I washed myself with the remaining medical alcohol that I normally only use to disinfect my shoes, Miss Peacham admitted proudly. But this surgical spirit wasn't kind to my peach-like skin at all. Then I suggest you use a different bathroom that still has functioning artificial gravity and a pH-neutral cleansing lotion. The director reeled off, visibly irritated, as she stood up. My word, you're being quite the little charmer today, aren't you? Miss Peacham complained as she stormed out of the common room, her towering hairdo swaying precariously. Dr. Simmervolheim, I would like to continue the tour of this ward now, Holmes suggested as he rose to his feet. So the four of them strode harmoniously down the corridor. Dr. Watson approached them with the enchanting Miss Kalstorff. I could not detect any physical illness in Lady Inga, he reported to them with a lustful sideways glance at her. Naturally, it's only her psyche that's been damaged, the director countered. Bad enough, Decker remarked sympathetically. Oh, Captain Decker, what a wonderful voice you have, Captain, Inga Kalstorff breathed with transfigured eyes. And so masculine. Would you record a few words for me? Then I can listen to your beautiful voice before falling asleep. Do say that I should take off my clothes and get into bed and so forth. Cheekily, she held her wrist computer under his nose to record his voice, and naturally the flattered captain was happy to oblige, while showing undisguised carnal interest in her. Ahem, hello ho, this is Captain Decker speaking and, telling you to remove your clothes and get into your little bed, wishing you an exceptionally good night. Oh, thank you ever so much, Captain. She winked at him and trotted off rather provocatively, even looking back once, almost as if to encourage him to follow her. Pah, Tornot scoffed. A voice fetishist. No need to be jealous, my dear first officer. She simply preferred my voice. Well then, I suppose we can continue with the tour, grumbled the director, who clearly wasn't pleased with this flirtatious exchange. Now, a group of 5 again, they continued their tour around the station along the corridor and reached Sector 5. Well, here we are at our laboratory, announced the director with a hint of pride in her voice. Although we house rather impaired women here, many of them still manage to make themselves useful, especially to me. The doors opened and they were hit by a veritable heat wave that nearly took their breath away. Oh no, that saboteur has been tampering with the air conditioning again. The director quickly scurried on her tiny feet to a console and busily fiddled with its controls. Phew, said Dr. Watson. So hot in here that a fire could easily ignite on its own. Quite right, my dear fellow. I can feel the scorching floor tiles through the soles of my shoes, Holmes grumbled. I suppose you feel like a penguin in the Gobi Desert, don't you? Tornot teased him. Right then, I've turned the temperature back down, Dr. Simmervolheim reported contentedly. Soon we'll have bearable conditions again. Now let me show you my experiment. Come along, gentlemen. Who knows what unpleasant business this will turn out to be for us, Dr. Watson anticipated grimly. Dr. Simmervolheim approached a glass door which was completely fogged up due to the mist behind it, making it opaque. This is an artificially created small rainforest zone, in which I've established a new cell culture that requires very humid conditions, she explained. As small as you? Asked Tornot. She ignored that. Careful, I'm opening the door now. Splash! A surge of knee-deep water poured out of the room behind the opening door. How true, Holmes agreed. You could grow rice here, Dr. Simmervolheim. Oh dear, she sighed. I do hope my cultures haven't been destroyed. But you said they need moisture, remarked Tornot. Decker looked piqued at his legs, from which the water was now rapidly receding. Well, at least a bit of refreshment after the hot air. It smells of marsh gas here, Holmes observed, flaring his nostrils. I'd say it smells like behind my aunt's sofa in here, Dr. Watson chimed in. From the back corner of the laboratory, a green slime suddenly oozed towards them. It kept taking on new shapes. At times it resembled a four-legged creature, then a headless biped, then a rotating cube, then a writhing snake. Oh, horror! Exclaimed Dr. Watson. What kind of hellspawn is this? My experiment! Shrieked the director, enraptured. It's alive! Hopefully not for much longer. Tornot let slip another comment. If I may be so bold as to ask, Dr. Simmervolheim, what exactly is your experiment meant to represent? Holmes inquired. That's perfectly obvious, she said with audible disapproval. You'll have to forgive our detective, said Decker apologetically, but he's a complete novice when it comes to modern science. Well, the green organism is meant to transform into a biological replacement robot that can execute commands when needed, she explained. Why don't you give him a test command? Holmes suggested. She hesitated briefly, then commanded in a loud voice, Stand! The slime immediately stood still before her in the form of a column. It works. How fortunate that the saboteur didn't spoil my experiment. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Dr. Watson sensed new trouble brewing. And indeed, suddenly the slime transformed into an octopus, which wrapped two of its tentacles around the petite director and threatened to crush her. That was all she could manage to say. Quick, Mr. Decker, do something, Holmes urged him, whilst trying himself to pry one of the tentacles off Dr. Simmervolheim, but failing in the attempt. Disintegrate into your components, commanded Dr. Watson, stamping his foot. Immediately, the slime dissolved into a slippery green liquid that trickled down Dr. Simmervolheim's pink overalls. Phew, she said with relief. That was a last-second rescue. Thank you very much, dear colleague. Well, I'm still used to giving orders from my time as an army doctor, Dr. Watson said cheerfully. We shall award you the Medal of Honor on the extended platinum ribbon, promised Tornot, with a meaningful glance at Decker. I think you should go back to the beginning with your experiment, he advised her. Yes, I suppose I have no other choice, since I can no longer give orders to this liquid, acknowledged the director with a hint of sadness in her voice. Who all has access to your laboratory? Asked Holmes. Practically everyone who's allowed to move about freely, she replied. So that's 16 people besides myself. And the ladies in the secure ward truly cannot get here? Not even through the air ducts, Dr. Simmervolheim? Inquired Dr. Watson. No, but we can certainly verify that with a visit to Sector 6, she suggested. Together, they continued their rounds and headed towards the secure ward. Doctor, called out a little female voice behind them. May I have a word with you? Can't that wait until later? Time is merely an illusion, the woman behind them philosophized with a peculiar absent-mindedness. That's Miss Xenia Xylotl, an astronaut who lost her spacecraft during an attack by hostile aliens, explained the director. What are aliens? Holmes wanted to know. Well, they're strange creatures that look a bit like us but live on another planet when they're not visiting us. Heh heh heh. Tornot grinned. Xenia Xylotl appeared outwardly fragile, not much taller than the director, though somewhat broader and wrapped in a cream-coloured jumpsuit with brown stripes. She wore her white hair parted on the left and asymmetrically. She had painted her eyebrows as black bars and her lips were made up in bright orange. What can I do for you? Asked the headmistress with an impatient look in her eyes. First of all, you could explain to me who these strange people accompanying you are, demanded Xenia Xylotl. Captain Decker, Mr. Tornot, Mr. Holmes, and Dr. Watson. Dr. Simmervolheim rattled off like a poem that stubbornly refuses to rhyme. I see. Another medicine man? Well, whatever. Zinnia Zilotl remarked with little enthusiasm. And I'd also like to know why there's no furniture left in my cabin. You have no furniture in your cabin? Wondered Dr. Watson. Could it be that you've confused the cabin with a lift? No, that cannot be. Do you take me for a complete nutter or what? She snapped irritably. Miss Zilotl, Holmes interjected, have you noticed anyone suspicious lurking around your cabin? No, only some of the other female patients, she admitted. Which ones were they? Asked the director brusquely. Miss Rishi, then Miss Blossom, and lastly Miss Afflitsko. So we can safely rule out the first two as suspects, said Dr. Watson. That leaves this Miss Afflitsko. She's a scientist who was bullied so severely by her superior that she dematerialized him, Dr. Simmer-Volheim recalled, scratching her temple. That doesn't sound good at all. What exactly does dematerialized mean? Asked Holmes. Well, atomized, with a neutron beam to be precise. It's a very quick and completely painless way to die, the director noted. Rather humane, I should think. Well, that's incredibly reassuring, said Tornot, shaking his head. And this dangerous woman isn't in the secure ward? No, not anymore. Due to good behaviour, I've released her back to the freely mobile patients, said Dr. Simmer-Volheim with a dismissive gesture. After all, there aren't any neutron beam weapons here. That immediately puts the good lady in the circle of prime suspects, Decker interjected into the conversation. What circle? Asked Tornot. We haven't even had any prime suspects yet. I'll call for her right now, announced the director, forming her hands into a funnel. Natalita Afflitsko, come here at once. Don't you have a loudspeaker? Decker wondered. Yes, but why should I use equipment when I already have a loud voice? Was her casual response. A young woman came running, wearing a bronze-coloured ruffle dress that reached down to her knees. Her feet were tucked into chunky black boots, and around her thin, brunette flyaway hair, she wore a silver headband. Did you call for me? Her voice sounded like a grater, yet her lips were painted in a soft shade of pink. Yes, might it be that you removed the furniture from Miss Zilotl's cabin? No, what would I want with the furniture? They weren't the ones bullying me. I only removed nasty bullies, she claimed, standing as rigid as a soldier at attention. And did you happen to notice anyone carrying furniture about? Holmes inquired. Yes, one of the robots. It was moving towards Sector 3, she replied. Then it's clear that he received the order from the saboteur, the director concluded. I suggest we continue our way to the secure unit. And what should we do now? Asked Miss Zilotl. I suggest you look for your furniture, replied Tornot. And the lovely Miss Afflitsko will surely be happy to help you with that. The two misses remained at a loss while the group of 5 set off again. Well, I couldn't bear it here for 2 days, muttered Decker, who was already longing to be back aboard his ship. But, sir, we've already mastered far greater challenges than this, Tornot reassured him. A dark figure seemed to be lurking at a bend in the corridor. Oh, that's Miss Humblog again, a rather disturbed individual, warned Dr. Simmer-Volheim. She's not the only one of those around here, Torno whispered. Miss Humblog appeared dressed entirely in black, with even her shoulder-length hair and lips matching this non-colour. Her long dress even had a train, and further emphasised her pale complexion, which seemed almost translucent like parchment. What on earth is going on today? She complained straight away to the headmistress. At times it's hot, then cold again, then the lights flicker, then suddenly there's water running along the corridor, then furniture is being senselessly moved about. What am I supposed to do? I haven't the foggiest who's playing such disrespectful pranks on us, lamented the headmistress, gesturing dramatically. And I'm feeling quite ill myself. If I hadn't been this tiny since birth, I'd surely have shrunk down to my current size. Miss Humblog, Holmes addressed her directly, you look as though you know more than all of us combined. Would you care to share your knowledge with us? You're a good judge of character, the Black Miss said with delight, narrowing her eyes. I noticed that some of our patients have been behaving very strangely. One of them in particular strikes me as very, very suspicious. Aha! And would you be so kind as to tell me who that might be? Holmes probed. Everyone else was also pricking up their ears, rightfully expecting to finally learn the solution to all the present irregularities on Space Station Delta 7.5. Miss Humblog smiled cryptically and chirped almost triumphantly, "Have you heard of data protection, sir?" "Data protection?" Holmes repeated uncomprehendingly. "Yes, the right to protect a person's data. Unfortunately, that makes it impossible for me to reveal my knowledge to you or anyone else. I'm sorry." With that, she floated away with her trailing dress, head held high. "What a silly nincompoop," Tornot fumed. "Oh, I believe she doesn't know anything at all and just wants to make herself seem important," the headmistress dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Let's move on. Time is pressing, even if some consider it merely an illusion." The illustrious group set off again. Who else might we encounter? Dr. Watson wondered to himself. As if on cue, an elderly lady appeared wearing a grey ensemble. "Ah, here comes a grey eminence," Tornot feared. "Probably the alpha female around here, am I right, Dr. Simmervolheim?" "No, that's just the harmless widow of an ill-fated astronaut who never got over his death." "Hello, how are you, Mrs. Armstrong-Jones?" "Dreadful. My husband appeared to me in a dream again and warned me about strange men approaching. And now here you come with these strangers. Who are they?" "We come from the stars to see you with delight," Torno rhymed cheerfully. "Those are just helpful gentlemen who want to solve our problems. You know, the trouble with the air conditioning, the lights, and so on and so forth," the director explained to her. "Mrs. Armstrong-Jones, my deepest condolences on your painful loss. When did your husband pass away?" Holmes inquired sympathetically. 25 years ago, she whimpered. "What? And you're still grieving?" Torno couldn't comprehend it. Quickly, Dr. Watson interjected. "My dear lady, you shouldn't torment yourself so, as constant grief easily makes women unsightly." "I beg your pardon," she blurted out. "Don't get upset," the doctor insisted at once. "It hasn't got that far with you yet." "Heh, Torno grinned cheekily. Holmes approached her and whispered, "Can you name a suspicious patient whom you believe capable of causing all sorts of mischief here?" Yes, I can name several patients for you, but I wouldn't suspect any of them of mischief," explained the grieving lady. "I rather believe that spirits are causing trouble here. It's best if you quickly return to bed and wait for the next appearance of your husband," Dr. Simmervolheim instructed her, whispering to the others, "Hopeless!" And once again the group of 5 set off, trotting along the long, seemingly endless corridor. Suddenly, Holmes stopped and hesitated. "What's behind this door that says 'Entry Forbidden'?" he asked, looking at the director. "Our air circulation system for breathing oxygen on the space station," Dr. Simmervolheim explained to him. "I'd like to take a look at that. Would you open the door, please?" "Fine by me, but I doubt the saboteur would tamper with that." "How can you be so certain about that, Dr. Simmervolheim?" Holmes asked sternly. "Tsk," Tornot clicked his tongue. "Because she would be affected herself. If the air circulation pump is destroyed or even just damaged, everyone present on the space station would suffocate within minutes." "But the lady who's wreaking havoc here is mad, completely insane, isn't she?" Holmes persisted. Yes, she's mad, but she'd have to be completely thick to cut off her own air supply," said Tornot, tapping his temple. Holmes took a deep breath. "To me, this shows that she isn't mad at all, but merely pretending to be." "Why would she do that?" asked Decker, perplexed. "Out of boredom," Tornot chimed in. "She's probably dreadfully bored without any male companionship." "No, I think she wants to escape from here." "By gradually ruining the station?" asked Dr. Simmervolheim, perplexed. "Yes, because she was waiting for Miss Rishi to fetch help, in order to obtain a comfortable means of transport that could take her anywhere, which wouldn't be possible with a rescue shuttle." Holmes raised his index finger, then pointed it at Decker. "Have you taken precautions to ensure none of the ladies can sneak aboard your ship unnoticed, Mr. Decker?" No," he had to admit, and ran as fast as he could to one of the windows, from where he observed something dreadful. Bloody hell! The Ultimo One has just taken off, without my orders. Actually, the command was given by you, though not from your mouth, but from that device on your wrist which now contains your voice, Holmes interjected. Exactly, Tornot now recalled. Sir, you told her to take off her clothes, which she clearly manipulated to make it sound like an order for the ship to take off. Angrily, Decker slapped his forehead repeatedly with his right hand, creating loud smacking sounds. What a fool I am! Now, Torno played it down. Don't be too hard on yourself. The woman truly had everything that men typically fancy. Holmes slapped his fist into his open palm. So now it's clear who has snuck aboard and is calmly giving orders. The beautiful Inga, Tornot chimed in and snapped his fingers. Cherchez la femme, as the French say. Fortunately, we don't need to search anymore, remarked the director as she folded her arms. Your ship is gone, Captain, but at last peace will return to my station. That's cold comfort, Decker fumed. Establish contact with the ship immediately, Tornot. Not possible, he admitted with a desperate glance at his wrist computer. The woman seems to have cut off the connection. Call for Fifi, Holmes ordered the director. Pfui! But this time the exotic creature did not appear. She's taken him with her, realised Dr. Simmer-Volheim. What absolute cheek from that wretched woman! If I remember correctly, you mentioned that Fifi requires special food, Holmes interjected. Yes, wait, let's check the storage room. It's just around the corner, said the director, and hurried ahead to have a look. Ha! She forgot the little creature's special food. Then she'll simply get new supplies. Tornot shrugged. For that, she would need to travel to the Andromeda Nebula, and even using quantum tunnels. Such a journey takes months. The little one wouldn't survive that. She depends on these food rations here for him, Dr. Simmer-Volheim realised. And how can we let her know? Asked Tornot. She's cut off all communication with the space station. But Mr. Tornot, Holmes stated somewhat condescendingly, she'll work it out for herself soon enough, at the latest when her exotic pet starts shrieking with hunger. But what if freedom is more important to her than poor Fifi? Asked Decker worriedly. I hardly think so, as women have a very close bond with their pets. I'm certain she'll reappear here straight away. Well then, let's wait and repair the facility she sabotaged in the meantime, Decker suggested. After a few hours and several completed repairs, Ultimo One did indeed dock at the airlock once again, and a hungry Fifi was the first to hop into the space station, closely followed by a contrite Inga Kalstorff. I'm sorry, but I found it so dreadfully boring here, she confessed to Dr. Simmer-Volheim, before turning to Decker with a seductive flutter of her eyelashes. Captain, forgive me for taking matters into my own hands. I'll gladly make amends. Tell me what I can do for you. Well, I would suggest... He was visibly struggling to resist her charms, but he did his best. That from now on you behave like a good patient and stop spitting out your medication, stop yanking off your electrode cap, and generally conduct yourself like a civilized person. Yes, she breathed. Anything you want. Shall we see each other again? But of course you'll see the captain again, Holmes interjected. Namely on the day of your discharge, when you're well again. And Dr. Watson added with a wink. So do hurry up with that, and stop causing mischief, you enchanting lady. And you won't forget me, will you, Captain Decker? She squeaked in a very high-pitched voice. Goodness no. To forget you, I'd need a whole packet of dementia pills, and I certainly won't be taking those voluntarily. After extracting a promise of reform from the beautiful strawberry-blonde saboteur, the gentleman slipped back aboard the Ultimo One. Well, that was quite a wild affair, Tornot joked. Yes, fundamentally, we humans are merely mammals too, remarked Dr. Watson. Speaking of suckling, Holmes chimed in. Come along, Watson. Let's have a few glasses of that excellent cognac we've replicated. Well then, cheers, Tornot grumbled. Sir, if they stay any longer, I'll need my daily dose of alcohol too. I would advise against that, or you might see two of us, Holmes joked as he made off with Dr. Watson. You were listening to Pomej. The Lunatic of Space Station Delta 7.5. Sherlock Holmes, The Galactic Cases, Episode 2. Based on the characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production.